Hello, my name is Tim Drew, and I'm a partner in the Corporate and Commercial Department of Witt. One of the first substantive documents that the parties may enter into in an M&A transaction is a term sheet. In this session, I'm going to provide a brief introduction on what is a term sheet, and then go on to explain the importance of entering into one. A term sheet is also known as a memorandum of understanding, or MOU, heads of terms, or letter of intent. So what exactly is a term sheet? Well, it is basically a document that outlines the key terms of the transaction which have been agreed between the parties, including the identity of the target company to be acquired, the purchase price to be paid, and the timeline for the transaction. A term sheet is usually expressed to be not legally binding, but it will contain some provisions which are specifically expressed to be legally binding. A term sheet typically will not bind the buyer to proceed with the transaction and will be expressed to be subject to the parties entering into formal documentation to conclude the transaction, such as the sale and purchase agreement, or SPA. The non-legally binding terms are typically the terms that set out the commercial details which have been agreed, such as what is being sold or acquired, the price, the settlement mechanism, time frame, and the other agreed terms. Despite the non-legally binding nature of the commercial terms, it is important that they are drafted carefully, as these terms provide a framework for the SPA to follow. A buyer will typically wish to insist on provisions dealing with exclusivity, restrictive covenants, payment of a deposit, governing law, and the dispute resolution mechanism to be legally binding. The exclusivity clause is important as it restricts the seller from participating in discussions relating to the transaction with other third parties for a specified period of time, typically up to 3 months, or until the buyer indicates that it does not wish to proceed further with the transaction. Any breach of this clause will typically entitle the buyer to recover its costs and expenses from the seller. If a buyer is required to pay a deposit, then the term sheet should contain a legally binding provision dealing with the payment mechanism of the deposit and its repayment or forfeiture in the event the transaction does not proceed. On the other hand, a seller will insist on a legally binding confidentiality clause. This requires the buyer and its professional advisors to keep all information disclosed by the seller in respect of the transaction during the due diligence process strictly confidential. The confidentiality obligation may be subject to certain exceptions, such as if the disclosed information is already in the public domain. A seller will also insist on including restrictive covenants to prevent the buyer from abusing information that it has received from the seller during the due diligence. An example of this would include restrictions on soliciting customers, clients, or key employees of the target in the event the transaction does not proceed. Term sheets are therefore important, and it is always advisable to engage an experienced M&A lawyer to prepare and draft one. Well-drafted term sheets provide certainty and clarity to the parties in respect to the transaction terms. They also provide a level of comfort to the parties in committing resources and time in proceeding with the transaction, such as engaging professional advisors and commencing due diligence. They also assist the parties in preparing the formal transaction documents, thereby saving time and expense and facilitating completion of the transaction in a more efficient manner. Thank you for your time during this short overview of term sheets and their use in an M&A transaction. Please enjoy the other videos in our Mergers and Acquisition series.